Hello and welcome back to the Beta 3 Squad podcast. Hi guys, my name is Liran and I'm a pediatric speech-language pathologist, and you are back with another episode of the Beta 3 Squad podcast. Today on the podcast, we are going to talk about one of the first noticeable developmental skills, probably as early as right after birth. And no, I'm not talking about the baby's ability to scream to the point where you can hear your own thoughts. I'm actually talking about gross motor skills. Those big muscle movements that are responsible for the first punches and kicks. Some of them are voluntary, some are less voluntary, but they are certainly noticeably there. And if a skill develops that early, we already know it's going to be an integral part of all developmental skills to follow. And who is better to help us break down gross motor skills other than a physical therapist? So I'm very excited to have Dr. Yael Weintraub with us today. Yael is a developmental pediatric physical therapist and also the owner of Kids PT NJ. Did I say that right?
Yes.
Okay, great. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it is absolutely my pleasure. So, Yael, you have 22 years of experience working with the birth to 3, even the birth to 5 age group. Can you just explain to us what is your role working with this type of population?
Sure. So I wear a bunch of hats, but in general, my role is to help children and their families in supporting their motor development, but also their total development. That includes things that we're familiar with, like learning how to roll, how to sit, how to crawl, but also can be things like how to move, how to plan to get from one side of the playground to the other, how to work through a classroom, how to really understand our body and space so that we can be fully functioning in school. And also outside of school, in the playground or in sports. That is my role.
That's great. So that's probably where we're going to start to just explain what are those motor milestones that we're looking for or that are unique with the birth to 3 age group. What should parents typically look for?
So my area, as opposed to some other areas of development, is pretty easy to understand because most of us are familiar with the motor milestones. It's the ones that the pediatrician will ask you about typically at your well visits. It's the ones that, most parents are familiar with. So the motor milestones start out with a baby developing head control. Then the next one that we're going to see is rolling, sitting, crawling, pulling to stand, walking, and then as the baby turns into a toddler, then we're going to see things, higher level motor skills. Those are things like running, climbing stairs, jumping, ball skills, things like that.
And are all those milestones important? I mean, does it really matter if my baby rolls from belly to back but not back to belly? Or is it really that important that my baby crawls before they walk? Why is that significant?
That's a great question. So the way I like to explain why these motor milestones are so important is because these milestones really give us a window into brain development. Okay, it's our way of knowing that development and the way that the baby's brain is progressing and maturing is typical. So it matters in the sense that we want to make sure that things are developing in sequence. It also matters because the system of motor development is a perfect chain, if you will. And if we eliminate or we don't reach a motor milestone, it sort of disconnects the chain and prevents us from reaching the next one. So for example, if a child doesn't learn how to roll, They can't also transfer into a seating position. You need to be able to roll in order to get into a seated position from your belly or from your back. And so every milestone sets us up for the next one. But a lot of things in development, or all the things in development, are interconnected. So these motor milestones really allow us to make sure that the baby is on the right track.
So, if I'm a parent and I'm listening to this and I realize that, my baby never crawled, they just went right into walking, or sometimes we hear they went right into running. Should I call a physical therapist?
It's always better to consult a practitioner if you have concerns for your child's development. However, you should realize that there's a range in attaining milestones. For example, crawling is typically attained somewhere between 8 and 10 months. That doesn't mean that everybody crawls between 8 and 10 months. It's just an average. So sometimes your baby might crawl a little bit early. Sometimes your baby might crawl a little bit later. I usually tell people, if your baby hasn't achieved a milestone 2 months or greater after the end range, so we spoke about 8 to 10 months, so after 12 months, if your baby's still not crawling, you should certainly call a physical therapist to consult.
Right. And I think we mentioned that in a different episode, that some of the resources available to parents now are either early intervention in your state, private services through your insurance, or anything else that is available.
Yeah, and even telehealth. I've had parents who live on the other side of the country. Sometimes a lot of states don't have the same resources. We live in an area that's very metropolitan and has a lot of medical practitioners and lots of hospitals. It's a center for medicine, but there's a lot of places, especially in the center of the country, that don't necessarily have those types of resources. So telehealth might be a good option, and that is in the form of a consultation. It's a good way to ask the questions you need to ask, and even get practical advice and exercises through the telehealth option.
That's good to know. And while we were talking about crawlers versus walkers, I actually thought about some of those motor milestones that kids sometimes acquire on the later end. But what if they're acquired early? Is that a reason to be concerned, or should I already anticipate that my child is a genius,
a super genius,
because they walked at 8 months and not like all those other average kids around 12 months?
So in the area of motor development, attaining a skill early is not typically a source of concern. But within the motor world, if your child's an early walker, typically it's sort of like, sorry, Mom, you're going to have to get really, really small shoes.
And chase them for way longer.
Way longer. Exactly.
So actually that made me think of a research article I read a couple of years ago. A research article that talked about the perception of parents during the crawling stage versus the walking stage. So they found, and I obviously read that from a communication point of view, they found that parents talked to crawlers with a lot more baby talk than the walkers. And at that point, parents used a lot more adult-like communication phrases. And actually, they also realized that mothers, specifically, used more warning words like no, stop, don't do that with walkers, but they actually didn't use warning words frequently with crawlers. So I thought it was fascinating to see that even parent-child interaction develops as motor skills develop.
I mean, I love that. That's great. You'll have to show me that article. No, but it makes a lot of sense, because when your children are hitting motor milestones early or late, people, look at them differently.
Right. And probably by now we convinced many people how important these motor milestones are. So I know for speech purposes, when a parent realizes that a skill is really, really important, one of the most common questions that I get is, if this is really important, what toy do you think I need to buy to help my child acquire this skill? So I'm wondering if you get that question, and also if you do get that question, what is your recommendation to parents that probably, as we develop this question, are opening their Amazon app and putting things on their wish list?
So that's a great question. And it's really hard to navigate because there's so many people telling you so many different things. So I give two big pieces of advice to parents. The first is try not to use containers. And the second is that in order to improve brain power, you should probably look for toys that have no buttons or batteries. So let me explain what I mean by both of those. So first with the container. So what is a container? So I call all those baby products that most people have on their registry: the swing, the bouncer, the glider, the exosaucer, the jumper fruit, etc. But also the car seat, the stroller. These are all containers. And the idea of a container is it's really something that restricts the child's movement. Now, car seats, strollers, high chairs, these are things that we need in order to get through our day.
For safety.
Safety, legally, you need to use them, right? But you really don't need a bouncer, a glider, a swing. I know. Everybody's like, no.
Delete.
No, don't say that. Okay, we don't need it. The baby doesn't need it, and the parent doesn't need it. However, the multi-billion-dollar baby industry knows that parents need a break. And I also think parents need a break. The problem is that we end up buying a lot of these products and we sort of shuttle the baby from the car seat to the bouncer to the swing to the, for a nap is still contained. Then we go back into a high chair, and the pack and play, and the carrier. And suddenly the baby didn't spend more than 10 minutes a day being on a mat in freedom of movement. By the way, also when we swaddle them, right? There's another way of restricting their movement.
Right.
So especially in the first 6 months of life, if I can give a parent any advice, it would be try your hardest not to use these things and use them for what I call necessity or emergency purposes. I believe every mother needs time to go to the bathroom. I believe every mother should have 10, 15 minutes to jump in the shower, put something on a stove, okay? If you need to use these things for safety of your child, for 15 minutes of entertainment so you could get something done, no problem. 15 minutes of anything won't make a difference. But if it becomes habitual and you start noticing that your child is spending 75% of wake hours in some sort of container, you're setting them up for most likely motor delays, okay? We need to fight gravity in the first 3 months of life. Fighting gravity means on our belly at wake hours, trying to lift our head off the mat. And if you can't do that by 6 months for about 10 to 15 minutes, you didn't have enough time on the mat fighting against gravity. So that's one thing I think parents should know. In terms of the toy selection, another multi-billion-dollar business out there, parents typically go to a toy store and they'll look on the shelf and they try to get the biggest bang for their buck. And the truth is that typically those toys have one active function that the baby needs to do, which is typically just to press a button. So if you really look at that toy and realize that the baby's active participation in it is so limited. And so parents will say to me, oh, okay, so what should I buy? And usually my answer is, really most of the toys you find in a dollar store. Blocks, nesting cups, pegboards, simple puzzles, all the old school toys that our grandparents played with. Those are the toys that really create brain power because the baby has to be very active in using it. And so certainly it's not harmful to have toys with buttons. It's part of typical development. but it's a very short window of using these toys. And even toys that have buttons, if you can buy the toy that has different levers, it doesn't have to have batteries, it'll just pop up. Those are better than the ones that you have to press and it like sings a song or something. There's a lot more motor function to those toys. So those are the two pieces of advice I would give parents.
Right. And I think that's also, we talked, last episode, we actually talked about trends in development. And that's actually one of the trends we see in communication as well. You know, right now they're selling these books with buttons. And when you click on the button, it makes the animal sound. And then, you know, the child or the adult don't really need to make that animal sound because the book did that already. We talked about apps and Miss Rachel videos and how they encourage word imitation. So we are seeing that trend right now. Do you think in motor development there are those kind of trends as well?
So unfortunately, the one trend I can share with you is not a great one. There's a very big trend within the world of motor function right now with children, and that is the trend of not moving.
Interesting.
So unfortunately, we're dealing with a lot of what's called sedentary children who are not going outside at the end of the day to run around like we used to and not ride their bikes as much like we used to. Typically, children nowadays, to wind down, they are on some sort of screen. And with the increased usage of screens, TVs, computers, iPads, phones, and even screens on our Alexas and Googles, and there's just screens everywhere. We're finding, and toys that are very, much of an entertainment versus an active participant.
Right, a passive
like what
activity.
Passive playing. We're really seeing kids not moving. And it's a real issue, not only in early development, but even more so in adolescence. There's tremendous talk about the epidemic of obesity in this country, and part of it is the nutrition or lack thereof. But the other part is the lack of movement.
Yeah. That's not a positive trend.
No, it's not. But we got to turn it around.
But maybe trends are often not positive. Maybe that's part of the definition of a trend. So as a parent, if I now realized that I do have that very limited window of opportunity, how can I support healthy habits, movement habits for a baby or a toddler?
That is the best question, because that is the keystone for everything. So, first of all, I think it's really important to pay homage to what's interesting to you, what moves you, what excites you as a parent in terms of your own physical exercise and activity. So if you're a mom who loves to walk, put your kid in a stroller and walk the neighborhood. Eventually, when they start walking on their own, buy them a little baby stroller, get one from Free Cycle, and you walk next to them while they stroll their baby in the stroller. And you're building healthy habits. Eventually, walk the neighborhood. Instead of driving them to the neighborhood friend, walk to the neighborhood friend, right? You're building healthy habits. If you enjoy bike riding, maybe first they're in that little attachment thing in the back. I don't even know what that's called.
The cart.
Whatever that's called. That thing in the back that you see. Or like sitting they have like attachment seats in the front of the bike. And then eventually they're riding their own tricycle and their own two-wheeler with training wheels. And then eventually riding their own bike. So you can build the idea of physical activity as part of your lifestyle by leading with example. And I think parents will feel very fulfilled if it's also something they enjoy to do. So that's one piece of advice. I also think that, setting time aside to put screens at off time
Right.
is probably a really important habit to get into. Beyond the fact that we could do a whole podcast about the effects of screens on brain composition, but I can assure your viewers that it's not anything positive.
Right.
But getting into the habit, not only for our children, but also, and I'm guilty of it too, as adults and as parents, to put the screens and the cell phones down. Maybe at dinner time, maybe you set alarms every, 30 minutes or so to just have a break, or whatever it is that you need as a parent to get back into interacting with your children. Taking them outside in the afternoon as part of your day, even having the afternoon snack outside might keep you out there for longer. Things like that can really become part of your routine.
Right. But just to be play devil's advocate here, if I live in a state where the weather is unpredictable, going outside might be harder most months out of the year. Or maybe it's just hard for me to go outside because I have 3 kids under the age of 5 and I'm home by myself, and it's really hard to keep everyone safe if we go outside. And I think one of the most common things we hear from parents is, I'm so exhausted.
Yes.
So
yes.
Even the idea of
True.
schlepping outside is really difficult.
Yeah.
What are some of the indoor opportunities we perhaps can introduce to encourage healthy movement habits in the home?
So first of all, 100%, all moms of young kids are exhausted. But I'll tell you, again, bringing the same idea indoors, figure out what makes you happy. Also, I always joke that the hours, everybody posts on social media those beautiful moments of their family looking ideal. And I think I've even discussed this with you, where I had this idea that we should only post between the hours of 4 to 7. Let's be real. Everybody should post their kids losing it.
Right.
And the mom that locks herself in the pantry and talks, you have ever seen those posts? Like, we all have those moments where we want to lock ourselves in the bathroom. So figure out also how you can make it a more positive experience being with your kids in the afternoon. For example, with me and my children, I have 3 children. They're all older now. But when they were younger, we used to put on music and break out into dance parties. Okay. And it was I love dancing, so that was really fun for me. And when they got older, we used, what was it called? So you think you can dance? It's on the Wii or whatever, PlayStation. So even using a video game to get physical activity. We used to have dance competitions. And then my youngest got older. He used to like to put DJ parties and lights. And so you could really make it a fun afternoon activity. And I typically found when I did that, everybody was sort of stop fighting.
Right.
And then also even relay races, simple things, minute to win it kind of games, carrying, a hard-boiled egg on a spoon back and forth, or having moms sit there at one end of the room and the kids are running back and forth or crawling back and forth, and then high-fiving mom, and mom's just chilling,
right.
At one end of the room and just relaxing. Things like that really can be a wonderful way to be physical and also to pass a difficult afternoon.
And I think, just again, from a speech language pathologist point of view, we want to also make sure that when we're doing that, there's eye contact, there is face-to-face interaction. It's one thing to have a dance party in front of the screen, or the child is willing to imitate movements that this particular person on the screen is doing, but not so much when just the music is on and only mommy's dancing. So maybe also to mention that there should be a healthy balance between the amount of time we spend moving in response to someone on a screen versus what the mom is doing, what the siblings are doing, right, which has so many more skills involved other than movement. So when I play that in my head, that's where my head goes. The other thing that came to mind, and that's actually a new term that I learned a couple of days ago while you were describing all the strategies, and they're all great for indoors, for outdoors. All I could think about is when my kids were younger, I had really big ideas about how I'm going to support their development. And a term that I recently learned that I think maybe now is more relevant because we have so much more on our plate right now as parents is called analysis paralysis. Analysis paralysis is when we have a goal in mind. I'm going to do this. And then we start realizing all the things that we need to do in order to get there. And we, especially moms, we start having these mental lists of all the things I'm going to do to get my child crawling or walking or talking. And the list becomes so overwhelming that we start feeling paralyzed. And then we end up not doing any of it. So out of all those great strategies that you described, the takeaway here is not to turn off this episode and start listing all the things I'm going to do tomorrow at once. It's best, and I always say that, quality over quantity. It's best to pick one activity that you can realistically apply during your daily routine to support your baby's development. So we are just throwing ideas here, but at the end of the day, we're also very busy. We're also very tired. And I can still feel really good about myself as a parent if I incorporate one thing that's new into my routine that prioritizes my kids' development.
Yeah, I agree. And if I can add to that, I think by the fact that whoever is listening and watching, if you are listening and watching to this, you are obviously looking to help your child. Right. So kudos to you for wanting to do the best that you can. And I think the one thing I always tell my moms is you don't give yourself enough credit.
Right.
Give yourself credit and also enjoy the ride. Sometimes I feel like when moms walk into my office, they're so nervous and scared and, my kid isn't doing, the doctor said he's not doing this and he's not doing that, or I noticed that he's not doing this or that they always think it's their fault. Mm-hmm. They always think they didn't do something right. And sometimes it could be, just the way this one came out. Right. Maybe he needs a little help. Maybe he needs a little time. In between figuring out if they're developing appropriately and incorporating strategies, take a second to also look at your adorable little baby, toddler, 3-year-old, and just realize that part of why they're so adorable and wonderful is because you did such a great job. So tap yourself on your shoulders, Mom. Give yourself some credit.
Absolutely. And we never do that enough.
No.
Yeah. So that's actually probably a good time to pause for a second. And I'm going to ask the viewers for a big favor. If you don't mind, pause this video for a second and then click on the subscribe or follow button. And then click play again. So go ahead, I'm going to give you a second to do that. And now I'm going to thank you for doing that for me, because the way this works is that when you support this podcast, you give others opportunity to gain access to this information. And as parents, the more you know, the less you fear. So by growing audience, we can allow all parents, caregivers, daycare teachers, anybody who supports the development of young children to learn something new. So before we wrap this up, I have to deeply thank Dr. Yael Weintraub for joining me today.
It's my pleasure.
You have helped us understand motor development, gross motor development, in a very critical time for children. So thank you for that. If parents out there have questions or they would like more information, how could they reach you?
So the best way to reach me would be to go on my website. It's kidsptnj, kidsptnj.com. And there is a phone number there, or you can email me through the website and be happy to set up a consultation or answer any of your questions.
Thank you so much, and we will see you all next time.